So hello, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in a moment. We're just going to let a few more people in. Okay, I think we'll get started because it's 1 minute past 5. So I think, hello, I can see Chris is online. So hello, Chris, I hope you're well. So let's get started. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's fantastic to see you all and be part of the launch of the Northern Policy Forum. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. My name is Daphne Doody-Green and I'm the head of CIPD Northern England, and I'll be chairing the session today. So some of you may know about the Northern region. We have 29,000 members here. So I thought I'd just quickly share a little bit about what we do at CIPD North and in the region, which will hopefully set some context for the Northern Policy Forum. So we're a very small and remote based team working North. Hello. Sorry, I thought I heard something.
Hello.
Hi there. Hello. Hi. I'm just doing the introduction and then we'll get started. So we're a small remote-based team here in the north, and essentially what we're here to do is to drive CIPD's purpose around championing better work and working lives through a number of member and customer engagement activities alongside senior stakeholder engagement. And that really helps us to deliver that purpose on the ground and helps to drive up good employment standards across the region, and really helps us to engage members in the conversation around creating fair and inclusive workplaces. And we do that through a variety of ways. We engage with HR leaders and senior practitioners across the north to really get their insight and perspectives and challenges around the world of work. We work with employers around professionalising their functions, and then we have a broad range of stakeholders that we work with, whether that's academics, combined authorities, metro mayors and policymakers, to really drive positive change in the world of work. So alongside this engagement, then we obviously take our knowledge, our insights, and take very much an evidence-led position on public policy issues. And we run a number of campaigns to help us change what we want to see, and we lobby with government, and you'll find out lots more about that in the session today. So back in April, we ran a member survey to really understand what our members were interested in terms of public policy. We got lots of feedback, one around public policy, but also how you wanted to get involved. And that's why we're delivering this public policy forum for you today. And the slide in front of you will show you some of the kind of top themes: no surprises, flexible working, inclusion and diversity, good work, all big themes right now, and big workplace challenges for the profession. And another big part of our work is to collaborate with our Northern Branch network, of which there are 10 branches across the north. We've got volunteers, senior professionals delivering fantastic membership engagement and network opportunities locally. And we also work with them on our regional agenda and member engagement activities in terms of pan-regional engagement. And I guess this today is an outcome of having worked with some of our fantastic volunteers who are here today. And hopefully we've got the pictures up of some of the policy leads who have been instrumental in shaping this policy forum, who continue to work with us. But we'll also take the insight and think about, well, what does that mean locally, and what can we be delivering for our members across those different 10 locations. So before we get started, I think just some messages to reinforce the purpose of the forum. I think we're all aware that there's been a huge shift in the profession over the last year, and it's become increasingly important that we really think about how we benefit employees and employers as this changing and very fast-pacing world of work is imminent. So part of our influencing work is really to create opportunities for our members, and part of that is to create the strong Northern policy forum that represents the diversity of businesses here in the region, and also part of our broader regional strategy. And we want to make sure that our members have, whether they're from public, private, third sector, have a voice and are represented when we're influencing policy, and any other regional agenda, whether that's levelling up, whether that's the impact on the northern economy as well. So I think I've said as much as I need to before we start to get into the forum itself. We'll be using the forum for two things. One is we've got our policy experts online today to really tell you about CIPD's public policy work. And then equally, we'd love to hear from you, whether you've got questions, thoughts, any insight that you want to contribute. This is the purpose of the forum, and we plan to run these quarterly. So we hope you enjoyed the session. Before we get started, just to let you know, this session is being recorded. It will be available on demand on the CIPD North YouTube channel, and you can access all of our other webinars there if you wish. If you can keep yourself unmuted while people are talking, and if you can submit questions in the chat function, we are monitoring that. So if you've got any thoughts, observations, pop them in there, use it as a way of networking with others on the call. So I'm now going to pass you over to our policy team. We're joined by Paddy Smith, who's the Public Affairs Manager, and Ben Wilmot, who is Head of Public Policy. And again, as I said, they're going to talk through some of the current public policy work, and more importantly, the opportunities for you to get involved. They're going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions. We may not take the whole hour, but we might. So get your thinking caps on. Any questions, please put them in the chat function. So I'm going to hand over to Paddy to start. Thank you, Paddy.
Thanks, Daphne, and thank you everyone for joining us. So I'm Paddy Smith. I'm the Public Affairs Manager, and I've got arguably the vaguest job title at CIPD, because it doesn't really mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But ultimately, my job is to represent CIPD, the policy team, and go out, build relationships, work with stakeholders to really boost the voice of CIPD and the HR profession, and drive the change that we want to see. We'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. But I'm part of a team of 3, but we sit within a wider policy team. And if we're totally honest, we've got a bit more work to do in terms of telling particularly our members about the policy work we do. There's some ongoing work at the moment that it's not necessarily the most visible part of CIPD's work on the website, and so we're aware of that. But hopefully, working with forums like you, we can certainly boost the image of the work we do, because there's a lot going on. Some people are surprised when they hear how much policy work we do, and sort of the work certainly I do going out talking to stakeholders. So I'm going to give you a very quick-ish overview of sort of how I go about speaking to stakeholders, getting our voice out there, and then Ben's going to talk a bit more in depth about the policy issues themselves. So if I could have, thank you, Tess. So when it comes to my job profile, it's ultimately trying to influence policy to drive or to champion better work and working lives. And sometimes it is changes in legislation, sometimes it is trying to drive cultural change through guidance, or just talking about something that isn't really spoken about too much, and just having conversations and getting something onto the agenda. It's not purely about just, we think this law should be changed to this, that, or the other. The way we do this is by building our team of our expertise, of our team of policy experts that which Ben heads up. And so we have some advisors whose areas of focus are skills, diversity and inclusion, employment relations. We've got some economists as well, and we're constantly looking at our own areas of focus and producing research and writing articles, getting our voice out there. I'd say we're quite unique as a professional body. There aren't too many that really, when I certainly go and speak to government, have the clout that we have. You have sort of the traditional lobby, the CBIs, the unions, but in terms of the amount of work that we do and the influence we are able to have an effect on in terms of government policy, I do think we sort of punch above our weight. The way we put together our sort of policy positions is often is based on research primarily and the expertise of our team. So we do this in a number of ways. We're constantly surveying employees or employers about a wide range of issues. For example, we do an annual piece of work looking at health and well-being, what's happening in organisations, and we report that every year. We do qualitative in-depth interviews with members, and we're always keen to hear, okay, so this is survey data, but actually what does that look like in practice? How is something like the apprenticeship levy, how does it actually work in practice? And those often put meat on the bones of sort of this is what employers generally tell us in numbers, but actually hearing from members is really valuable. Other than that, we often convene roundtables of bringing in insights. We've got a couple coming, including one in the north, looking at how the skills agenda can be made, particularly around further education, can be brought to life. The government saying it with its FE reforms that it wants to place employers at the heart, but what does that look like? And so we've got a couple of roundtables to examine those areas. In recent years, we've also tried to widen the way we build our insight, and we've got a very talented labour market economist with John Boys, who spends his days going through official data sources, so ONS primarily, actually just readily accessible data that he can do some. He loves a graph, and he's absolutely brilliant at just really getting some insight of stuff that's already out there, and then that certainly boosts our voice and credibility. And we've got a bit more mischievous in recent months, and we started to do some digging around sort of with freedom of information requests. And I worked on a project around isolation payments. For local authorities were paying out because our view was people couldn't afford to isolate if they contracted COVID, and there wasn't really much incentive to get a test. But then the government introduced £500 payments, but we wanted to say, are they working? And I mean, we found that only 1 in 3 were actually being paid out. We got some quite good coverage around that, but that's something we're looking to do more about. Then there's more sort of, so those things are, I'd say, more proactive, but then we do more reactive as well. So there's often government consultations on changes to the law. There's been a bit of a dearth recently, just given what's been in the world of government bandwidth has been taken up, but there are a few we expect. Ben will talk to you about a couple there. But when government consults on a certain issue, we certain survey members give our policy position and try and drive change there. At the same time, there's often parliamentary inquiries. So say the business department, so the business committee, the Work and Pensions Select Committee. So we often provide evidence to them, and often our experts, our policy team, are invited to appear before them and give our evidence there. So admittedly, that in recent years, we've had a primary focus on the UK and Westminster, but over the past certainly 2 to 3 years, it's been a key part of our regional strategy to really boost our policy voice in regions. So we've got a team in Wales, we've got a team in Scotland, and as Daphne's team demonstrate, we want to work more in the regions of the UK. So yeah, we're getting a bit more local. So we're working, for example, with local authorities on things like good work in various areas, Liverpool, Manchester, and I think it's going to happen in Yorkshire as well. So that's hopefully gives a bit of a flavour of how the team sort of go about and try and influence policy. So if you could move on, please, Tess. And this slide, I just want to talk about, mention this is where we often talking to members and they provide really valuable insight. And so these are just a few ideas that some of them do happen now, but we want to get better at. And so this is kind of where you as a forum come in. See right at the very top, we have a UK, generally UK forum. We've got one in Scotland, and now we've got one in the north of England. So it's really helpful to just have a group of people that are interested in policy, want to engage, want to tell us what's happening, be it at branch level or forum like this. And it really just helps us when we go out and say, this is what our members on the ground are telling us. Yeah, mentioned branch policy groups. Got a few of the leads here. Yeah, again, we want to get a bit better at sort of having dialogue. So if you speak to your local branch, we hope to do a lot more with them there. We often, a number of our members are part of panels at YouGov. So I mentioned the research that we often do, employers and employees. We know a lot of our members sit on these panels. So when we want to ask, say, business leaders or some people in certain functions, what's going on with this, that, or the other, then that's another way we get member engagement. Member polls, again, we don't do possibly as often, but we certainly do sort of put survey monkeys together every so often. They often come when there's a government consultation. I mentioned there was a bit of a dearth at the moment, but when they come out, we are expecting a few more, which Ben will talk about. But this will be another example where we will sort of want to hear what our members are telling us. Similarly, focus groups, which it may be where a forum like you, if we want to, what do our members in the North of England think about flexible working, for example? We run a focus group. We've done a number of these over the years that civil servants who work on these issues get really interested in, sometimes come along just to listen. It's one thing reading our consultation response, but they do find it really valuable to actually sit in on a meeting, and then they might pick up on something that we don't think is that significant, but actually that can really change their thinking. And we've had some really good feedback. We've run some behind the scenes. Also, I remember being asked we ran a focus group on ethnicity pay reporting way back when, I think 2017, when it was all first mentioned, and they just wanted to get toe in the water, what's happening there, or how would that work in practice. And then I've mentioned as well, one-to-one interviews really valuable to us. A forum like this, really valuable. We want to talk about apprenticeships, for example. We want to get to a place where we can just say to the Northern team, we want to get a sense there. Can you see if anyone wants to talk to us one-on-one, how it's working their organisation? And yeah, so as I said, a bit of a confession that we need to get better, but what a great forum, what a great vehicle this is. So these are a few ways that we hope to work with the forum and see its success. So that's enough from me. Pass on to Ben, who's muted.
Thanks, Paddy. Kes, could you move on to the next slide, please? So I'm just going to try and give a bit of an overview of some of the sort of the main policy issues that are in play or are likely to be certainly coming through shortly. I'll start with the long-awaited employment bill. This was flagged back in December 2019 in the Queen's speech when Boris Johnson first became PM. And obviously lots has happened since then, and government has had lots on its plate. So no surprise perhaps that it's had some delay. I think there was some concern that there was no mention of the employment bill in the most recent Queen's speech in March. But the Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has said that the employment bill will be introduced when parliamentary time allows. That's quite vague still. We're still not absolutely sure when that's going to happen. And the other thing we're not sure about is whether all of these measures, which were set out in the original Queen's speech back in 2019, are going to be taken forward in the employment bill. I think some we know about. So we know that the government will be consulting on this idea of making flexible working the default, and I'll probably come back to this later on in my presentation. It has announced the planned creation of a single enforcement body, although we've got quite a lot of concerns about their plans because there's no additional resource plan for this new body that brings together a number of 3 areas of the enforcement machinery. So I think we've got some real question marks about, is it just a cosmetic change? So but anyway, that is happening. We will be feeding further into our thoughts around what needs to happen to make that an effective reform to actually improve labour market enforcement. We are still, I think, expecting this idea of a right for all workers to request a more predictable contract. This is about addressing so-called one-sided flexibility. So particularly looking at, I suppose, 0 hours contracts and ensuring that if people are on 0 hours, they are genuinely opting in and benefiting from that flexibility. So we'll see if that idea around this, whether workers can request a more predictable contract if their hours actually don't change that much week to week. Is this something they should be able to request? We do expect government to extend redundancy protection to prevent pregnancy and maternity discrimination. So this would provide redundancy protection for new mums for 6 months after they return to work, which obviously would be extremely welcome. We are expecting changes around allowing parents to take extended leave for neonatal care, and the introduction of entitlement to leave for carers, but this will be unpaid, which is something which is, I think, disappointing from our perspective. I've put employment status down because this is one of the areas that was left in limbo following the Matthew Taylor review of modern working practices, and the government did say that they would be taking action to simplify and clarify employment status, but as yet there's a deafening silence, despite a number of sort of further cases coming to court around Uber, Deliveroo most recently, showing the ongoing ambiguity and the difficulty even the courts have in making judgments on employment status. So, and this is an area where we've been doing quite a lot of work, and we've published a report in November 2020 with some recommendations around reforming employment status. So if there's any sort of people who've got particular interest, maybe that's one we can take offline because it's a bit wonkish, but really important nonetheless. That's it, I think, for this issue. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Skills policy is certainly an area that this government is very interested in. It published at the start of the year a white paper on further education reform, and as Paddy alluded to, this is about the ambition of putting employers at the heart of the adult skills and vocational training system. And we are expecting at least 2 consultations to be coming out shortly on that, and as Paddy said, we've got a couple of roundtables. We're hoping to hold one with a northern focus, looking at how this change to FE policy would actually work, and what is required to provide more meaningful engagement between employers and FE providers. So that's definitely one that is pending, and one that we'll be feeding into, and hopefully we'll be making that consultation as visible as possible, and creating opportunities besides this roundtable for members to feed in their views on that issue. The apprenticeship levy has been an area where we have been campaigning for quite a while, since 2017 actually, for a more flexible training levy, and this is based on about 3 major pieces of research with members now, which has consistently shown a significant majority of HR leaders, employers want to see a more flexible training levy, because they believe that would be much more responsive to their skill development requirements. And I think if you look at the data, we're seeing since the apprenticeship levy started, we've seen overall fall in starts, fall in number of apprenticeships going to young people, and disproportionate number of apprenticeships going to sort of generic management apprenticeships, which are pretty expensive. Now, I'm just conscious of time, so I better not spend too much time on the detail. T-levels are another important area of policy for this government. So that's something which we'll be continuing to communicate about as more information comes through. And Other areas are around sort of the lifetime skills guarantee, which Boris Johnson has highlighted, around giving adults who don't have A-level or equivalent qualifications access to free training development. I better move on to the next slide. Thank you. Of course, flexible working is one of the big topical issues at the moment, and I'm pleased that I think CIPD is right at the heart of this debate. Peter Cheese, our chief executive, co-chairs the Department for Business Flexible Working Task Force, which is sponsored by the Small Business Minister Paul Scully, and the task force represents most major government departments. It represents stakeholders like ACAS, the CBI, TUC, the British Chambers of Commerce, Institute of Directors, Federation of Small Businesses, and a number of other organisations. And its first task under this in its new remit, because it was in place before the pandemic, it was reformed, and its first task is to create essential guidance on hybrid working. So we're expecting, and a working group has been working on that, and we're expecting that to be published. ACAS has been holding the pen on this, but we're expecting that piece of guidance to be published in July at some point. We're not quite sure yet because of the uncertainty still about government plans, and obviously hopefully that will become a bit clearer soon. And then the task force will be developing best practice guidance on hybrid working, which will probably be sort of September, October. It'll also then turn to explore the potential to increase the use of ad hoc or non-contractual flexible working. And it will be instrumental in feeding into this forthcoming consultation on making flexible working the default. Now, we're not quite sure what that means yet. I mean, it's basically ensuring that flexible working is the start. If employers will have to ensure that jobs are flexible unless they have a very good reason not to. I think we have some concerns about making it too formal, because it could lead into problems around what is a flexible job, who defines flexibility, is it the employer or is it the individual, both. But anyway, when that consultation launches, we will be really engaging extremely widely and thoroughly with members, and will be very pleased to engage with this group on this consultation. I think it's also worth mentioning our CIPD's Flex from First campaign at this point. So we have been campaigning for the right to request flexible working to become a day one right, rather than something that people have to earn after 26 weeks. And we know that probably according to our data, about 30% of employers already provide a day one right to request flexible working for their staff. So to a large extent, this is about trying to encourage the increased uptake of what we'd see as existing good practice. But we were also calling for a legislative change to the flexible working regulations, so that change is baked into legislation as well. Because I think one of the challenges we've got is a lot of the conversation, of course, has been around this sort of shift to home and hybrid working, and we know employers are really focusing around how they can further develop and improve their practices in that area. They're not thinking so much about other wider forms of flexible working, particularly different forms of flexible hours working, which can mean that people who can't work from home also have the ability to benefit from flexibility. So that's something that we've been pushing for on quite strongly, and will continue to do so. Next slide, please, Tess. Another consultation response we're expecting is from government to respond to the Health is Everyone's Business consultation. This again is over 2 years old. This will look at maybe making changes to flexibility over statutory sick pay to better support phased return to work, potentially the removal of the lower earning limit for statutory sick pay, and possibly some changes to occupational health funding or subsidy for SMEs to enable them to fund occupational health support. We're also going to be doing a separate piece of work looking at statutory sick pay and how it and whether it should be increased quite significantly, and if so, how would that be done? Who would would it be government? Would it be employers? Who would cover the cost of a significant increase to statutory sick pay? So again, that might be something that, if there's interest within this policy group, when we're developing that policy, we will be looking for input from practitioners on this issue. So it might be one that we could discuss. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is probably my final slide. I'm just conscious of time. The issue of race and discrimination is also one that has come under scrutiny through the government's Commission on Race and Ethnic Minorities. Now, the Commission reported earlier this year, and it concluded that there's no institutional racism in the UK, and highlighted that socioeconomic disadvantage and regional inequalities were as likely to be as important to people's life outcomes as racism. Now, we don't disagree that socioeconomic factors and regional inequalities are of course important, but if you go through the report and read it in detail, then there are a number of ethnic minority groups that are facing ingrained disadvantage when it comes to employment and pay and progression opportunities. It's very hard to read the report and look at the data and not conclude that actually institutional racism is still alive and kicking in certain aspects within the UK. The report's recommendations were slightly underwhelming. So the Commission's recommendations were slightly underwhelming. So basically, their conclusion is that best practice and improved access to guidance on best practice and a voluntary approach to ethnicity pay gap reporting would be sufficient to address some of the workplace issues around racism and discrimination. Our view is that there really has to be mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting. We know from previous attempts around gender pay gap reporting, there was an initiative called Think Act, which was the initial sort of voluntary approach, and virtually no employers took the opportunity to report voluntarily on their gender pay gap. So we don't think a voluntary approach around ethnicity pay gap reporting is going to have any impact. So we will continue to press government to introduce mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting. I'll just leave you with the next slide quickly. Thank you, Tess. This is really just to emphasize that the bandwidth of issues that we look at as a policy team is quite broad, and it's because the bandwidth of the profession is broad, and a lot of these issues are interconnected. We're keen wherever there's interest from members to engage on these issues and to build our evidence and insight base. So if there's issues that resonate with you, then our policy team is always happy to take calls and to bring member views back into our work. I'm conscious of time. I've gone slightly over, I think, Daphne, so I better finish there, but very happy to take questions on any of these issues later in the meeting.
Thank you, Ben. It's fine. You're doing well on time. So thank you both, Ben and Paddy, for sharing your public policy world. I think that's been hugely insightful for everyone on the call. There's not that many questions, but there are a few observations which I think are really interesting. So I'll kind of start with those and then see where we get to. I think what might be helpful before we end the meeting is, you've shared a huge amount around all of the different priorities and issues, but I guess in terms of the next step with the forum, what would be your kind of, top priorities that we could potentially address through this forum and in the time, in a particular timeline. So I don't know whether you've seen them, Ben and Paddy, but there's some reflections around, which there always is, around the differences between flexible working and hybrid. But I guess from a policy perspective, somebody's made a suggestion, and when about there may need to be new or developing policy in this area to kind of clear up the distinction between those in terms of how we attract and develop talent. Do you have a kind of view on that? And there is another question related to the task force, but we'll pick that up in a minute. Ben, do you want
Yeah,
to...
I think it's a really important distinction, and because I think quite often, well, certainly in some of the debates in the media, is that sort of flexible and hybrid working are sort of conflated quite often, and I think the big issue is that hybrid working is very much about sort of flexibility over location, whereas of course, you know, flexible working is location, both flexibility over location and hours, and I think it's the flexibility over hours which is, you know, probably the area where more change needs to happen, because we know that, you know, that there has been and there will be, you know, this shift, I think a longer term shift to hybrid working, and yet the wider flexibility arrangements or opportunities for other workers seem to be fairly limited, and seem to, you know, the flexible hours side of things, whether it's annualized hours, you know, things like job share, turn time working, flexi time, these sorts of flex working arrangements, broadly the uptake and use of them has plateaued, you know, over the last sort of 10-15 years, and as I said before, it seems that employers are not, because of the pandemic and because their focus has been on home and hybrid, as they are thinking about the return to the workplace after restrictions are lifted, means that they're not thinking about more flexible working more broadly. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to, and I think the task force is very clear about that, and I think that, you know, I think that will probably come into focus when this consultation around making flexible working the default. I think some of those issues will crystallize, and so hopefully it will be, you know, we'll be able to create more clarity when that happens.
Thank you, Ben. And there was just one on the task force which you may have addressed, but I think certainly in the conversations I'm having, the kind of implications not only for organisations, it's the implications for the organisations as well as employees, in terms of the conversation around hybrid working, and whether the task force is addressing, you know, the whole piece. Is that something that you're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the task force is initially focused on employer guidance.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've been, as I'm sure most people on the call are aware, our knowledge content team has been developing a whole range of guidance around sort of home and hybrid working, remote working, so which we've been feeding into the conversations around what is best practice guidance for employers. Yeah, and I think, you know, it's this challenge around, you know, sort of balancing, you know, how people want to work, people's personal preferences with the needs of the business, without compromising the needs of the business, and that's you know, hopefully what, you know, this guidance will help to, you know, help organisations to find that balance.
Yeah,
I just add, Daphne, as well,
yeah,
something
sure,
we've consistently said is just a lot of the focus has been on home working and return to offices, but a lot of people have not had to go to work this whole time, and then there's the risk of course, of the two-tier workforce. If you have people that have to be in one location, but then office staff that can have, there's a fairness aspect as well. So this is something we've been consistently talking about in our commentary, but when it comes to sort of best practice guidance, that's a key focus. That probably sits with the profession, our members,
yeah,
others. So
thank you for that. And I think Vicky, and I can see Vicky Case on the line, you've made some observations as well, all tied into flexible working. I think we could run a whole 2 hours on flexible and hybrid working conversations, but I'm conscious there's more questions coming through. So I guess there's a couple of questions about how we're going to work as a forum and how we're going to assign different priorities and issues, which I think we'll just pick up towards the end of the call. But there is a question related to young people in relation to youth unemployment campaign and T-levels. And I guess how can CIPD influence a joined up approach rather than separate policies? I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we have sort of published reports on skills policy in the rounds before, and we're planning to publish something again this summer, looking at skills policy from a strategic perspective, because the government has set out its skills policy within its plan for growth, and our view is there's lots of holes in it, and so we'll be taking that sort of strategic perspective, looking at the different elements of skills policy, and identifying our recommendations for reform in the rounds, because I think you're right. It's been an area where over the last year it's been quite unclear, and it's still a little bit unclear about what government really wants to change in this area. It seems at the moment, and because of probably bandwidth, they've been sort of iterating very gradually on existing skills policy, but our view is, I think if you look at sort of top level, we've still got falling investment in skills, that something that's been entrenched for the last 15 years, and we've also got we've got a significant gap in adult skills funding. Government we're still investing over £1 billion less a year in adult skills and lifelong learning than we were in 2008, or just before the financial crisis. So there was, austerity basically cost us a huge amount of public funding on skills, and that hasn't been addressed yet. So I think there's quite a few issues that we want to and need to continue to highlight, and and lobby government for changes around skills policy.
Hopefully that answers your question, Lynn.
If I could just, Daphne, yes, part of our work is that, sort of glass half full approach is at least this government is talking about it, because in the nature of sort of my role is sort of what does this government care about? So under the previous administration, there was a huge focus on good work, and Ben mentioned the employment bill that we hope won't let that slide, but at least this time around they are talking a lot about skills. There's a perennial issue that who's the skills minister is a pub quiz question, because there are so many of them over the years, but big focus has been in the Department for Education. It used to sit in business innovation skills, a bit more joined up, but now all the focus with DFE's bandwidth is taken up by schools in the current, so it just doesn't get. But at least there are some signals, and we're critical, of course, that we want to see an improved skills system, but at least they're talking about it, which I think is better than recent years. So just to add that.
Thank you, Paddy. So we will get on to how the form will work. There's another observation comment about agile, hybrid, really interesting about the kind of terms we use. Is it agile? Is it hybrid? We talk about return to work, we talk about flexible working. So sorry, did somebody speak then?
Well, sorry, I just said, blended is the other one.
Oh, and blended, yeah.
As well, yeah.
So I think, I guess the call is, we need to get our definitions right, and maybe that's something that, CIPD,
the task force has been having some of these conversations as well, so I think the task force collectively decided that against using agile and just sticking to flexible as its sort of top line, sort of tagline, I suppose, because I think feeling that generally it's more widely understood, particularly amongst smaller firms and owner managers. I think if you start to wear agile, then it's more of maybe a more strategic HR conversation than something that an owner manager of a small firm. And I think that's one of the challenges, is like, trying to ensure that it's simple, and that different audiences can also understand broadly what the issues are.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So if there are no more policy related questions, but please, add them. Oh, hang on a moment. Oh, and that's what I was trying to get at. What kind of organisation do we need to maximise the benefits of hybrid working? Okay, again, another useful observation. So a couple of questions just further up the chat about how the formal forum will work, how we assign groups, do we have specific groups? And I guess that with this being the launch, and we do have some insight, as I mentioned before. We ran a survey back in April. I assume not everybody on the call will have filled in that policy questionnaire that really helped us to understand, one, what areas were you interested in, and then how you might get involved. So I think a first step would be that you complete that questionnaire. We can send it hopefully as part of our feedback, but it is on the CIPD North landing page as well, under the policy section. So if the more, I guess, information we can get around what you're interested in, that would help in the first instance. But in terms of going back to your slide, Paddy, I mean, there are multiple ways of our members and customers helping to shape policy, helping to get involved, both regionally, at a branch level, through polls. But I guess the people on here today, we are directing this group and this forum, and I suppose it's back to that. What are the kind of key priorities? And then as a kind of smaller policy steering group, we'll take that away and we'll inform this broader group around what that might look like. But I do know there are individual consultations, there's rapid response, there's other things like that. So I don't know whether you want to just give a flavour of some of those things to help people understand how they can get involved outside of a broader group or an event. Paddy, Ben, I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah. I mean, the initial first point I'd sort of say in terms of how it might work, in sort of, if we can say, sort of normal times, when we used to have a bit of a sense of we can expect this consultation around this, and we know what work we're doing at CIPD, so we can sort of map events and we'll focus on this. For what I'm sure are quite obvious reasons, there we don't have that currently, and so that's kind of where we think, we're doing this piece of research, so it'd be really helpful to have some qualitative research to looking at, I know, post-Brexit skill shortages. It'd be really useful there. A focus group would be helpful with this. So in sort of, because it's all a bit up in the air at the moment, so we're not able to plan that, but hopefully sort of in, fingers crossed, in say 6 months, we would be able to do that. And we'll work with Daphne to be able to say this is what would really add value. But one thing we are certainly trying to do with the UK forum is to run maybe quarterly events that will inform our research, and so they may be sort of roundtables. But I'd also, Ben mentioned our policy team. They're keen to have conversations. We are. If there's something you want to know, we're happy for it to be two-way. If there's something, what is CIPD's view on this, that, or the other, and we can facilitate that in that respect. But I mean, gold standard would be we've got something we could share with the forum. This is what next year is going to look like, but because of the climate we're in, it's a bit difficult.
Sure.
Yeah. I think what we know as far as possible is that we are expecting at least 2 consultations on the government's FE white paper reforms, and we think that they should be out this month, but we're not absolutely sure because DFE officials aren't completely sure themselves. And we know that the Making Flex Working default consultation has been, we think, broadly written. We think it's probably with, it's not far from being ready, but the timing, it could well be September possibly, Paddy. I think we're not, and even if you talk to Bayes civil servants, they don't know themselves. So I think the thing is, it's because of the quite extraordinary environment, really, everyone's been operating in, government as well. So hopefully we will start to get a bit more forward sight of what's coming up, and but it's a bit difficult. But as soon as we get anything concrete, we will be communicating. As soon as there's any opportunities to engage on any of these issues, we'll be looking to communicate what those are, what they look like.
Okay, that's helpful, Ben. I guess, but we've got all of the people who are interested in being part of this policy forum and helping us with different areas. So I suppose my ask would be, the more we can collect that data through the policy questionnaire, then that helps us to know which of our members are interested in all of the areas that you've talked about tonight. So that might be individual, or it could be that there are groups of people that we can run focus groups or roundtables with. And then I think from a branch level as well, this is going to be hugely informative in terms of what we might run at a local level. So partly, our work to work with the policy leads and the region is to kind of build the forum in a way that makes sense, and in a way that kind of gives you the rapid response and feedback that you need. So to the people who've been asking the question around how's this going to work, you've probably identified that we're still working that through. That was part of, I guess, launching this tonight and getting a sense of interest. But if you can fill out the questionnaire, that would be great. Sorry, Jo's leaving and she did ask a question, but I think I will ask it on behalf of her, because it might be interesting for others. So it's about the main problem with apprenticeships and skill development is that it's being used as political football. It's constantly moving scenario with costly new ways of tackling the concern, and we need stability.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think unfortunately it is an area where there hasn't been consensus, and it has been recommended that there is a sort of all-party commission before on skills, and that hasn't been something which any party has been championing. So it's a problem, and it does mean that there's been quite a lot of flip-flopping on skills policy. So I think part of what we do around skills policy is also trying to engage and on something, on recommendations that are likely to, if they're evidence-based, if they reflect the views of employers, then they're more likely to hopefully land and influence thinking over time. But I completely agree, Joe.
Thank you. Hopefully, she did hear that response. That's good. So she didn't jump off just before then. So I think, I guess in summary, we need to kind of take away some of the thoughts from this evening in terms of the next step on the policy forum. So we hope to reconvene every quarter, as I've said, but equally we would like to hear from you offline. We will be sending feedback forms out. So if you want to tell us more about how you think this forum could work, I do appreciate that you've all got separate interests, so it might be that it breaks out a little bit and we can work through that. But in terms of understanding what's going on within public policy, we think the quarterly forums are a really good way of just understanding the current situation. So we'll probably continue with that, with other activities adjacent to that when our public policy team need it. So unless there's any more questions, I'll just wrap up quickly. I'm just going to check in with everybody. I don't see anything else coming through in the chat. It's the first time we've ran this public policy event in the North, and I think it's been hugely insightful. So thank you, Ben and Paddy, for joining us tonight and telling us all about your world. And we, as I said up front in the introduction, we really do want to represent the voices of our members here in the North and the diversity of businesses. So it's great to have so many online, and we do want to get you involved as much as possible. So just a couple of reminders from CIPD. Lots of resources right now that you can have access to in terms of the Coronavirus Hub. We're constantly updating it. And as Ben talked about, and we've all kind of talked about quite a lot, the kind of flexible working and all the content and resources that we have around that. So we just wanted to remind you of some of the great resources that CIPD has available. And here's just another infographic of everything that we're offering, including a new health and wellbeing line and support that we launched over the last year to help our members. So if you're not accessing that, I would absolutely recommend that you do. So we'll be in touch with the next date. All I'd ask is that you fill out the questionnaire if you can, and you fill out the feedback, because that will really help us to shape what this forum looks like as we go forward. And I think that's everything for me. So thanks again for joining, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.